मैं गेट बंद कर रही हूँ।
Hi Payal, hi Poonam.
हाय अंकित।
So Payal, Poonam, I have another meeting. So I'll stay on here and make sure all the speakers are here, and then I'll take off for a bit. Is that okay?
या ओके।
So you guys stay the co-host.
ओके।
Okay.
Hi, ma'am. Hi, ma'am. Am I audible to you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Mansi.
Hey, hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
Hello, Dr. Pinak.
Hi, hi,
Hi, sir.
Hello everyone.
Video, yeah.
hi, Mansi.
Hey, hi, Pinak, how are you?
All good, all good. Hi, Ankit.
Did you get on a call with Dr. Diwan or Arpit, Dr. Pinak?
Yeah, I got on a call with Arpit.
Great. Hello, Dr. Diwan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Dr. Diwan. How are you?
Hello, Pinak. Sorry we could not connect on the other day.
Yeah, there was
Mansi,
some problem
Saurabh,
at my end, with connectivity being very poor and just not able to connect.
no issues. I think you would have been briefed by, I think, either Arpit or Ankit.
Yeah, I was briefed by Arpit.
All right, great. So, if I may repeat, and not to offend, but I think the purpose here, all the 96 startups are actually in the fundraising stage, and they're hungry to, they have appetite to do so with the value proposition sitting with them. uh, and what they are looking from us, and in fact the panel partners, panelists, is to help them give the tips in order for them to connect better with investors, either national or international, but with an ultimate objective is how to raise funds and how to reach the requirements. To put together the 96 startups are from 1 to 5 crore and 25 crore and up, the entire basket. And together cumulate, they are looking at raising $100 million, close to that. Good propositions. Many of them have raised at least one round. So some would be coming for second or third round, which they are intending to look at. So from your perspective, these are biotech, health tech startups, but non-biotech startups, whatever the way you evaluate, way you handle, similar propositions need to be, would be effective for this cohort as well. It's just that they need to be primed and told upfront that, hey guys, you lack this element, though the technology is solid, but you need to shine it in order to reflect it better. So that's a snapshot, Pinak.
Sure. Got it.
Great. While you would be filling in for the in place of Asta,
Palak will be joining in.
Palak. Okay,
Yes.
all right. Okay. Ankit, would we have uh, sharing rights in case required?
So, I think Payal.
Yes.
So, can you give the sharing rights to Dr. Diwan as well?
Yes. Okay.
Mansi, I thought I'll use a few slides just to give an overview. That would be helpful rather than speaking.
Sure.
We are expecting Saurav, right? There you go. Hi, Saurav. Good afternoon.
Hi, Dr. Diwan. How are you? Hello, everyone.
Hi, Saurabh.
Dr. Manish, you can try presenting.
Should be okay. I think it was, yeah, it is showing me the options.
Okay.
Should be okay. Thank you.
Hi, Saurabh.
Hi, Ankit. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
So, I guess just Arpit is missing right now, right?
Yeah.
So Payal, people would be logging in as participants, or how would it be? It's not like a typical webinar, or
No, 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 no. So we won't be seeing people in the lobby. If I see, I'll just let them in. But there is no restriction as such.
okay. So the panelists would be seeing everybody on the screen, or
Yeah, they can. Yes, they can. So I can see 13 participants as of now
Mhm.
in the participant list.
Okay, so they are in the lobby right now.
Yes, yes.
Behind.
So can we start?
While Poonam, Arpit is just joining in another second or so. If we can wait for a minute. Yeah, Arpit is here. Hi, Arpit.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. Can we begin?
Hi, Palak. Hi, everyone. So, Payal, just to reconfirm, so this is the cohort that we are seeing on the screen who have joined in, or there is another lobby that is there and not visible to us?
No, we have 18 participants that I can see, and also we have 7 people watching live on YouTube. 7 to 8. 11 now.
I see. I see. So maybe I think let's begin, and then people will be pouring in.
Sure, sir. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Poonam Bishnani, Officer Advanced Stage Funding at Bairak. I welcome you all on behalf of Bairak, Startup India, and Indian Venture and Alternate Capital Association to this very exciting session on investors' perspective on startup pitches, a very important aspect for the startup aiming to raise investments. We are extremely grateful to the speakers and panelists for taking time out for this important discussion. To begin with the session, we have with us Ms. Palak Bhatia, Assistant Vice President, Startup India. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Poonam. A very warm welcome to all of you. I am Palak, as she mentioned, and I will spend the next 5 quick minutes telling all of you about Startup India, some of the things that we do that can be useful for this cohort, particularly some funding initiatives that I think would be extremely useful for all of you. I hope I am audible perfectly fine. All right, thank you so much for confirming. Uh, Quick introduction about Startup India. I'm sure all of you know about it, but it's an initiative by Government of India, launched 6.5 years ago, roughly, and with the objective that we want to build a great ecosystem for everybody to operate in. With time, we've realized that we've come a long way, and some of our activities have gone on to help a lot of startups. Bairak has been such a wonderful partner in this journey, wherein they have created a great ecosystem for biotech startups and healthcare startups in particular. And let me sort of point out a couple of things that are extremely critical for all of the startups to know. One great resource that I think that all of you need to extremely sort of tap into is our Startup India portal. It is a great repository of resources. It is something that we've built over a lot of time. It has information related to a lot of government schemes. It has information related to a lot of stakeholders, their programs, a lot of opportunities to connect with the larger ecosystem that can be extremely useful for all of you. And let me give you some specific examples as well when it comes to here. Related to funding, a wonderful initiative called Startup India Seed Fund Scheme has been introduced by the Government of India. The idea of which is to support early stage startups with small ticket grants as well as debt or convertible debentures. Um, it is being operated via incubators. Close to 100 incubators are now partners of the scheme, and I would strongly urge that early stage companies do utilize all of this. In fact, a lot of our resources are great in terms of the entire life cycle of a startup. So if you are on day zero looking for a problem statement to work on, we have created this idea bank full of problem statements for you to look at, to tap into and create opportunities out of. There is an extensive network of incubators upon the platform as well as offline that you can tap into to get that early stage guidance for building up your business and for growing it. Um, the seed fund scheme is a wonderful resource. A lot of other government schemes such as BIRAC's Big Grant, um, Tide scheme from Mighty, DST's Nidhi Prayas, Nidhi SSS are great resources when it comes to early stage funding. If you move on a little bit in your life cycle and you talk about entering the market or getting more business, getting more customers, a lot of good resources such as corporate programs. So a lot of companies that are looking for innovative products that can be useful for them, that can be integrated into their business, can be acquired by them, can be bought by them, are being hosted on the platform. Then there is the government. So a lot of you may be creating products that are relevant for the government to buy, be it government hospitals, be it state governments, etc. And government e-marketplace, GEM, that we call, is a wonderful resource where you can enlist your products, which will be visible to all government stakeholders for them to buy. In fact, DPIIT recognized startups also receive exemptions of prior experience, prior turnover, and EMD, which you don't have to provide, which is extremely critical for a new company, which is young, which is still looking to find their footing in the market. And you will be able to get opportunities to get bought and work with the government a lot. Then there are a lot of international initiatives that if you're looking to expand to different countries, there are bridges that you could explore. You could find soft landing pads if you would like to explore there. We've also built a platform called Marg, a mentorship platform which is useful across the life cycle of a startup. So if you're looking for mentors, it is yet to open for startups. We are collecting a good cohort of mentors, and may I request all of the experts on this panel also to look at it. This platform is going to open up mentorship at scale for the country, wherein we're trying that offline or online connections can be made via this platform. Relevant mentors and mentees can be brought together to have meaningful conversations, to get guidance related to build to their businesses, etc. So a lot of these resources are now at all of your startups beck and call. It is all collected into a big umbrella called Startup India. Really specific to funding, there's also something called the Fund of Fund for Startups, in which a lot of VCs have been given funds by Startup India to invest into slightly later stage company with equity and debt funding. If any of you is looking for slightly later stage investments from VCs, there are 60 plus VCs across the country. Of course, you should focus on getting your ticket size, your sector, your stage aligned with what they invest in. Have that study sort of done, and only then send in your pitch decks to them. But this is also a great resource for all of the startups to actually tap into to get equity funding. I am close to the closing of my 5 minutes and sticking to time. I will maybe take a pause and even open it up to for any questions, maybe just 2, 3 small questions if anybody has them. I'll take a pause, but this is the basic gist of what Startup India is, and happy to be facilitators for any of you for any problems, especially related to government connections, finding the right people, getting procurement, getting connected to various stakeholders of the ecosystem. Our team is here for all of you. I'll take a pause here.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the insights about the Indian startup ecosystem. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Manish Diwan, Head Strategic Partnership and Entrepreneur Development, BIRAG, for a brief introduction of biotech startups' potential with regard to the investor network. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Poonam, and thank you, Palak. Startup India has been very, very helpful and integral to steer the growth of the ecosystem. I also acknowledge IVCA's partnership and endeavor to help the startups learn and connect with the relevant investors uh, to, to help them move forward in their fundraising journey, and acknowledge the presence of Pinak, Mansi, sort of kind of you. What I'll try and do is give you a perspective of how biotech ecosystem is growing and how the startups are actually building up in the value chain uh, through a couple of slides, if I may share. Uh, if somebody can confirm if the slides are visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Great. So from a central enabler perspective, from Biotech perspective, which is enabling the biotech ecosystem, here's what we see. That number of biotech startup in the ecosystem is has increased over past 10 years by more than 10 folds. We now have 5,300 plus biotech startups in across the country. The enabling environments like number of incubators have also increased. More importantly, the translation of these startups into taking their ideas and innovations towards commercialization, that has substantially become tangible. So we have 700 commercialized products and technologies originating from these startups. In the process, startups uh, need essential fuel for growth, which is the funding. And we can see a sizable corpus getting generated from outside the granting aid and from public-private investments. And most of the biotech startups, we all understand that they are technology-led. So IP, creation of intellectual property, is also evident. All these numbers are poised to grow as we move forward and look at in next few years by 2025. It is evident that every year we are seeing year on year addition of new startup creation. Even in COVID pandemic, we could see addition of close to 1,000 new biotech startups coming into being, and intending to take the translational lead towards development into tangible products and technologies. To do so, besides all other things, they require to raise funding as they progress. From BIREX direct uh, a very close watch where BIREC has facilitated with respect to raising of angel and VC funding, we see that with small amount of infusement through the equity schemes, startups have been able to raise close to 10 times of that value, and 60 to 70% of the startups have been able to raise angel funding. And among the angel funded startups, they've been able to successfully raise the VC funding too. And once we look at across the ecosystem through both public eyes, we get to see many startups, be it in the field of uh, deep tech, rare diseases, drug discovery. They've been also able to raise a substantial amount of funding from the VCs and angel ecosystem. And there are examples, sorry, there is examples across different domains of biotech startup. It is healthcare, industrial biotech, for example, uh, the clean solutions, uh, drug discovery, waste to value, mm, deep tech like stem cells, organ regeneration. So there have been several examples integrating uh, AI ML into the solution that connects for the healthcare delivery, or creating wellness devices or first-in-class therapeutics. So there have been a range of startups at various stages who have been able to raise such amount of funding. Of late, we conducted uh, where Startup India was also part of that event, the first ever Biotech Startup Expo 2022. Honorable Prime Minister was kind enough to inaugurate the exhibition where we had a congregation of large number of biotech startups. So from that uh, exposure, we got to receive about close to 100 startups who are at the fundraising stage. So this particular uh, session for the startups and investors to interact is essentially devised to help them in their fundraising stage, and we can hear from the mouth of investors that what are the important tips, important gaps, what in their mind that the biotech startups in particularly uh, have overlooked while connecting with investors at the fundraising stage. You might have been very sound in the technology, but when it comes to translate your success stories or your plans, profit and loss statements or growth stories, uh, those strategic numbers which investors typically are looking for, so we can actually gain more insights from the investors directly. So I'll stop here, and we all are very excited to hear from the panelists what do they have to say regarding the biotech startups in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Uh, Now I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Saurav Singh. He is a growth investor at Trifecta Capital. Mr. Singh would share his thought about Indian healthcare, biotech, and pharma ecosystem. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Poonam. Just share my deck.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Little better, but I think still you have to increase your volume, sir.
Okay. Is it any better now?
It's loud and clear, sir.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you can view my screen.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saurabh. I'm an investor at Trifecta Capital. Quick brief about me and my firm. I've spent about 11 years now in the startup ecosystem. The first half being an entrepreneur before switching sides to become an investor. At Trifecta, we have two investment arms. Late stage equity fund from which we invest in Series D and E companies, and a venture debt arm from which we typically invest in Series A to C companies. Our ticket size ranges up to $35 million. Personally, I invest in health tech, consumer tech, and agri startups, amongst others. Over the next 10 minutes, I'll kind of walk you through what's going on in the startup ecosystem in general, and also the healthcare and biotech startup ecosystem, which is the topic for today's discussion. Before we kind of jump into the matter at hand, let's take a quick look at how the startup funding is faring these days. There are a lot of rumors sort of going around. So in the 3 quarters prior to Q2, we saw record-setting VC funding flows. Almost $2.8 billion of VC capital. I've excluded the PE part here. So $2.8 billion of VC capital invested in Q2. So it was a reasonably active quarter, even though it was at about 75% of the 2021 peaks. It was still far above the pre-COVID flows. Early stage activity, which is more relevant for this audience, remained strong with nearly 2/3 of all deal activity in pre-Series A or Series A funding rounds. During the quarter, prominent India-dedicated VCs have also announced large funds, several of which are in excess of $500 million. This indicates continued long-term interest in the Indian startup ecosystem. It would be fair to say that Indian funds have never had more dry powder than what is available currently. If you look at the healthcare ecosystem, the healthcare market in India is pegged at about $160 billion currently. Healthcare spend in India has been growing at a very healthy pace, 13% CAGR between 2015 to 2020. And the growth was largely driven by increasing prevalence of lifestyle diseases, rise in government spending on healthcare, surge in income levels, boosting affordability, and then some new age trends such as medical tourism, as well as a focus on wellness and preventive care. Now, while the healthcare opportunity is large in terms of overall size, it is still much lower than the global standards. When considered at a per capita level or as a of GDP. If we adjust for purchasing power parity, for example, healthcare spend in India per capita is about $300. It is just about 20% of the global average. The lower spending on healthcare, if you look at the key factors, there is lack of access, the number of doctors available, per unit people. So for every 10,000 people, there are metrics to indicate India has only about 9 doctors compared to 26 and 20 doctors in US and China. In rural areas, the number is still worse. 4 doctors, even lesser, available for every 10,000 people. Affordability continues to be a challenge. 60% of healthcare spend in India is out of pocket. Most of the healthcare insurance providers and plans in India cover only inpatient care expenses. While 90% of medicines sold in India are generic, they are sold as branded generics, which tend to be costlier than the typical generic medicines. Further, doctors in India often do not prescribe molecules, but specific brands for generics. Poor quality is another factor. It's estimated 20% of the medicines sold in India are fake, counterfeit, or substandard. And large portion of the prescriptions issued are handwritten, and the level of digitization is still very low. Awareness also continues to be low in India. We have taken a lot of leaps, but much still needs to be done. Awareness about diseases, treatments, health centers, preventive care, health insurance, this still needs to come up. And we still are at a stage where a lot of Indians prefer to opt for self-medication as a first resort when it comes to treating. The key constituents of the Indian healthcare market are hospital treatments, pharma, consultation, diagnostics. Together these account for about 86% of the healthcare spend today. And therefore, it should not come as a surprise that most of the well-funded healthcare startups belong to these segments. E-pharmacy, surgery, diagnostics have taken a lion's share of the funding in healthcare space. Pharmacy, 1mg, Pristine Care, Healthians, etc. They are very well known today. This is a non-exhaustive list though. EMR telemedicine space has also seen its fair share of startups. However, this sector, I believe, is yet to see a widespread sustained adoption. Medical chains have done reasonably well, and many of them have now transformed into profitable businesses. The generic medicines and chronic disease management sectors are what I would label as the sunrise segments within healthcare. India has the largest chronically ill population in the world. Hence, even though there are a few startups in this space, I believe these sectors will see a lot of action in the next couple of years. Same applies to deep tech, and there are several other startups in various healthcare segments, be it wellness or SaaS. The key takeaway from this slide is that startups today span the breadth and depth of the healthcare segment. So the question is, where do opportunity areas arise? We talked about a couple in the previous slide, chronic disease management and generic medicines. We are yet to see a large-scale application of AI and ML in the sector. A couple of use cases which come to my mind are using AI to interpret a radiology test, or using AI to develop a treatment predictor, which can take symptoms as an input, provide diagnosis along with treatment plan as an output. And if someone is able to develop such a solution, it will be a boon, specifically to the rural areas of India, where doctor availability is still scarce. India's population is aging, resulting in another opportunity in the geriatric care segment. Quickly moving on to the biotech sector, the sector ranks amongst the sunrise sectors in India. It already has a market size in excess of $12 billion, with biopharma being the biggest contributor, followed by bioagri and bioservices. I know there are more than 4,200 startups. I think this number might have increased to 5,000 by now. It is a large number in this space. Majority of these startups are in herbal tissue culture, micropropagation, food nutrition, biofertilizers, and diagnostic verticals. Biopharma has attracted the most number of startups. Devices segment has several startups. Agri and clean tech are also seeing some action. Again, this is a non-exhaustive list. Several of the startups such as MedGenome, Bugworks, GPS String have raised large funding rounds in excess of $20 million. And while we will discuss about fundraising later today in the next session, for the entrepreneurs in audience planning to raise funding, it will be a good idea to reach out to founders of some of these funded startups and get their perspective on fundraising. Finally, I'll talk about some of the key challenges for biotech startups, and the following come to my mind. We'll talk about the capital part in the upcoming panel discussion. There's a clear shortage of talent. We need more bright people to join this sector. Perhaps all the stakeholders present in this webinar can work towards it. It also seems that there's a lack of balance between R&D and monetization in several startups. A lot of biotech startup founders come from research background, PhD masters, and sometimes they fail to prioritize business over research. And I'd like to leave the audience with a thought on this last point. And for this thought, I'll just draw upon the the famous BCG metrics from yesteryears. This is a simple framework which works in deep tech and can therefore work in biotech too. This emphasizes essentially the balance required between resources and monetization. The products being developed are classified into 4 quadrants. And the first quadrant, also known as the cash cow, consists of products with the low resource requirement but high monetization potential. Second quadrant, known as the rising stars, consists of products which require high amount of resources but also has a high monetization potential. The third quadrant, symbolized by a question mark, comprises of products with low resource requirements and questionable monetization potential. In other words, the complete potential of such products has not yet been discovered. And the last quadrant, which is often symbolized by a dog, consists of products with a high resource requirement but a low monetization potential. In other words, these are often R&D projects done just for the sake of research. My recommendation to biotech startup founders would be to target having at least one cash cow to start with. Once you have a cash cow, spend resources to develop a few rising stars. On the way, if you end up with a few question marks, it's fine. It is possible some products in the third quadrant eventually end up in the first one. However, you have to absolutely avoid the dangerous fourth quadrant. So, that's it from my side today. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on, it's the time now for a panel discussion on what investors look for in health tech, biotech, pharma ecosystem startup. It's an absolutely pleasure to welcome our panelist, Dr. Pinar Shikhande, Director Health Cord, Advisor Private Limited, Dr. Mansi Agrawal, Partner Alchemy Ventures Partners, Mr. Arpit Agrawal, Director Bloom Ventures. The session will be moderated by Mr. Arpit Agrawal. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, BIRAC, IVCA, for giving us this opportunity, Startup India for giving us this opportunity to address all the lovely startups here. And, I think there could not be a better and more equipped panel that I have been given to moderate and have a discussion with. So it is totally apt, and thank you for putting this together. I'll just give a little quick overview about what we do. Bloom Ventures is an early stage venture capital firm. We are not deep tech or biotech specific. However, we have made more than 10 or more investments in deep tech sector. Couple of only 2 companies over the history which are biotech like. Apart from this, we have made about 5 or 7 investments in healthcare sector. So we have an insight into what works in this sector. Some of the companies were, thank you, Farah, for putting on your list, Medfin, B2, THP, and so on, which were on that list that you showed. Thank you. I have been investing for about 10 years, part of various entities, and over the last 6-7 years, dedicating a lot more time on healthcare and biotech and the deep tech sectors. So in the process, I don't come from the background of biotech, but I definitely have gotten a lot of perspective. I'm using that perspective to put this panel together and hoping that panelists will love to have their opinions. I would kick off this panel by asking one question to all three of my panelists, Saurabh, Mansi, and Pinak, and hoping that they will be also quickly giving their introduction so that everyone who's listening in realizes what they do. My question is that, we have seen that biotech is a very fast emerging sector, but there is not as much funding going into biotech companies in general as compared to larger companies, for example, in a B2B SaaS environment or even a B2C consumer internet companies in India. So, Mike, I'm very curious, and if you have perspectives, all three of you, Dr. Pinak, maybe you will want to go first and talk about what if do you think it is as mature as other ecosystems, and if not, what can really help? Also, your introduction, please. Sorry, we can't hear you. You are on mute or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Arpit. And thanks, Startup India, IVCA, and Biotech for having me on this panel. I think, just to give you an introduction of the fund, Health Quad is a healthcare focused, in fact, health tech and digital health focused fund, which invests in healthcare technology, which is trying to solve for the challenges of Indian healthcare, which are accessibility, affordability, and quality of care in India. The fund was launched in 2016, and since then we are now investing from our second fund. We typically do investments in Series A, Series B, and Series C companies, which have proven revenues of at least $1 million, and come in with checks of a minimum check of 6 million, can go all the way up to $20 million. So that's the kind of profile of companies that we look at while investing. We generally try and avoid pre-revenue companies. As a personal background, I come from the healthcare background itself. So I was a clinician and the director of critical care medicine at the Fortis Group of Hospitals for almost 10 years prior to joining HealthQuad. And prior to that, I was at Leelavati Hospital and did my MD from the Armed Forces Medical College and my super specialty in critical care from the National Board. But since then, I have been associated with HealthQuad since 2016. To answer your question, Arpit, I think it's important to understand that biotech, especially biopharma, in India has not really attracted the same kind of capital that one would expect, say, in a US environment or a Canadian environment. And a couple of reasons in this context, I think, Saurabh had alluded to that the lack of patient capital and the ability to be able to kind of create a bouquet of such companies where, unfortunately, there are going to be failures in biotech space. And the ability to take those failures means that you have to spread your risks. And that is going to be a very, very critical factor. Now, to spread your risks, you don't have those many companies where you can actually look at and say, okay, we have a now good spread of, 18, 20 companies where you can spread your risks and hope that, 3 or 4 of them will go on to be the winners. And that has been the challenge that has always kind of faced, which early stage investors in India have faced. The other, of course, is the whole. Even if one was to invest in a company like this, then the other challenge that you have is the regulatory hoops and hurdles, where the regulatory pathways are not clearly laid out. And if they are laid out, they are just far too time consuming. And hence, that again brings you back to the question of patient capital. The third point, of course, is that, there has to be a ecosystem which has to be created where, many of these clinical trials or validations could be facilitated through uniform platforms in either government hospitals or partnerships with private hospital setups. Unless and until we are able to kind of create that environment, the ability of biotech startups to actually grow and prove their product will remain a challenge. And lastly, just to complete what I was saying, is that many of the companies come up with great products, but they are probably they come up with a single product, say in a medtech space or a biotech. Even in the biotech space, they could have at best a one or two molecules, and that becomes a big challenge for the go to market. If you have a single product and you're trying to get to the market with a single product, becomes an extremely difficult proposition. And hence one needs to look at it in a manner where either you are able to develop that product and be able to sell your IP to a larger enterprise, or you then collaborate with other startups to kind of create a unique bouquet of products which can be taken to the market. Those have been the challenges that one sees in the current environment.
Thank you. Thank you, Pinakin. Very useful. I want to move to Dr. Mansi. Dr. Mansi, what have you seen? You've been an entrepreneur for a long time. Now you have shifted to become an investor. What is your perspective? I'm sure ecosystem has evolved, but what more remains to be done?
No, thanks. Thank you so much, Arpit, and thanks, Biotech, IVCA, and Startup India for putting this panel together. I wish this panel was available when I was an entrepreneur. So really miss this kind of an ecosystem engagement. But just before I answer your question, Arpit, as a background, I'm a partner at Alchemy Ventures, which is also a healthcare-focused fund like HealthQuad. But we tend to come in at slightly earlier stages with check sizes anywhere between $1 to $5 million. We started in about 2018. And since then, since it's healthcare focused, I've invested in 10 startups across a variety of subsectors within healthcare, from diagnostics to retail pharmacies to, unfortunately, not much in biotech space, but with a new fund launch, hopefully some investments in the biotech industry as well. To answer your question, Arpit, I think Pinak has covered a lot of points that I already had, so I'm just going to add to a few of what he said. I think as an entrepreneur, I have made all the classic mistakes that I think everyone has also made who are listening to this. And as Pinak had also mentioned, I had started a medtech company which was focused on one product in a very niche segment of the market. And I guess this is a very classic entrepreneur mistake. You start with one problem because you just tend to want to solve one thing, and you just want to get success there, and only then build out a portfolio of products. You need to start with one problem, solve it, then move on to the next. Otherwise, there's only so much bandwidth that I think any entrepreneur, and I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs may be nodding their heads, might agree with me. There are only 24 hours in a day, and so many things that they can do. So I completely understand why it starts with one thing. I think where the challenge lies, especially as companies try and scale up beyond $1 million, which is getting supported through angel investments, etc., and they start going to more formal capital providers such as VCs. I think they're not able to articulate the 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 scientific problem that they're solving, whatever it might be, with a solid commercial and a business plan. And it also goes back to what Pinak had said. They're not able to fully articulate how distribution of that product will be done if it gets developed in the first place. So I think it just remains an R&D idea, and a lot of companies that we have also evaluated or seen in their early stages, I think the bridge between a R&D project versus a viable commercial business, I think that bridge is something that we have not seen many companies be able to articulate. Whether it gets done or not is a separate issue, but I think that articulation and that thinking, that deep thinking that goes into making any product into a commercial business is something that we've seen that sort of lacks in at least the proposals that have come to us. Secondly, I think on follow-on capital itself, I think venture capitalists are just one source of capital. I always urge early stage founders to also look at strategic capital early on and not be afraid or shy away from that, because the kind of distribution, the kind of access, the kind of expertise sometimes that they can provide for an early stage founder can be very valuable, even if it may mean your exit opportunities might reduce a little bit. But I think the early support that a startup requires to scale and grow and for it to become a viable option for a VC funding somewhere down the line, I think that access gets bridged. And I think also VCs tend to get a lot of confidence if a strategic is on board, because it validates the product, it validates the business model sometimes. And I think I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs shy away um, from that route. So I would really encourage and urge you guys to start looking at some of these partners early on, if they are available to you. Thirdly, I think a lot of healthcare companies or early stage startups, they also are not um, articulate or communicating their pricing, the distribution, the scale up plans beyond India as well. I think the Indian market is just one of the markets that they can tap into, but unfortunately a lot of the VCs have not seen a lot of success based in India alone. And I believe that if a problem in biotech is being solved in India, it certainly has some global application to it. Like we've seen in SaaS, and now it's expanding to SaaS across all subsectors. So I think also just thinking about, are there global implications to what you're building? And maybe look at some global capital as well, because I think Indian capital, as much as we collectively try and move the ecosystem forward, it may still be a very small provider of the kind of capital that's required for this ecosystem to move forward. So I think looking at international investors who are keen at looking at Indian companies may also be a very viable source of capital for early stage companies.
Super. Thank you, Ansi. This is lovely and great perspective. Saurabh, I know you have had a chance to cover a bunch of this anyway. If you want to add to this question, also give us introduction about Trifecta again.
Yeah, I guess I covered that part. The only part I missed was, I have been an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. So, early on, almost 11 years ago, I was involved with setting up a company called Clove Dental, which is a chain of dental clinics now. So, I've had a tryst with healthcare for a long time now. Just to coming to the question you asked, Arpit, I think at least till now, the case has been that the mainstream sectors have always been favored, over the relatively niche deep tech, and biotech sort of is a subset of deep tech space. It feels like with so much money coming into play, maybe, these startups will start getting some more love from the investor community. One point which I think biotech entrepreneurs often tell me is that there is also a lack of expertise among the VC investors when it comes to life sciences knowledge. And being a part of the investor community, I don't blame them. We have our own priorities, but I guess that is one thing which the VC community, can work on. Because sometimes, most of these guys, the founders are sort of coming from a technical background. They may not necessarily be, very sales oriented, and hence might find it difficult to communicate to us. So perhaps we as a community can spend some more time, maybe get some life sciences expert on board who can sort of talk in their language. This is a point which has come up often again and again in my discussion. So perhaps, this might help. Second point I would like to highlight is, Pinak did refer that there are some regulatory constraints. So my suggestion to the startups is that look at spaces which are not that closely regulated. Perhaps, if you compare to pharma, for example, sectors such as animal nutrition or plant nutrition are not that closely regulated. And hence it might be, the red tape involved might be much lesser. So, the startup community can look at these spaces where they are likely to hit the hurdles less and where they can kind of focus on the product and the development more.
Super. Thank you. This is lovely. Now changing gears and now putting all of you back in the spot and saying, okay, what would you like to see companies do better? Is it only about the pitching? Is it about what are the early signs? I know that pitching is an art. A lot of it depends on the subjectivity of the person on the other side. However, there are a few things that you have seen companies do which allow them to be a lot more successful. Put biotech hat on, but also talk about broadly healthcare. Mansi, you want to start this?
Sure, sure. I think I did touch upon, I think, the pitch part and what needs to be articulated. What I'm going to add is that, and again, I don't know if it's relevant to all startups or not, but I think, either as a team, to have a balance of a technical person and a business person, I think is quite relevant. So what I'd love to see more is a complementary team that comes together, wherein one person could be focused on the R&D, on the science part of the business, and the other person's more focused on how do we scale this up, how do we take this to market, because go to market itself is something that needs to be bridged over a long period of time. Product market fit is something that needs to be established, and I think that's where most companies fail. So I think that has honestly been one of the biggest challenges. Sometimes we found a great technology but have not had enough confidence on the founder being able to commercialize the technology that they've built out. So I think that's something I would actively work towards as the companies are maturing enough to come to a VC for funding.
Okay. And what about pitches?
I think in pitches again, the so I think one of the challenges I've always had is either the market size has been overestimated or underestimated. I've never found a balance of a reasonable market size that is that seems truly addressable. Sometimes the numbers are upwards of 100 billion as a addressable market size, and that's too off. And I think all of us at the panel know that. So I think just doing some more work on what a true market for their own product looks like, and by true market, it could mean market based on geography, market based on product segment, by user segment, and by the distribution segment. And there are multiple other ways. I'm just taking the highest priority items. So I think that's something, if they can communicate, articulate, and why they are better positioned in solving that problem. Because as we all know, biotech problems or the life science issues that they are solving may not be local in nature. These are products that have global implications. So what makes them unique? What makes them the right candidate for funding in a market that eventually will have global acquirers who will also have access to global deals and probably have seen or are seeing similar companies from across the world.
Okay, great. Thank you. Saurabh, would you want to touch upon what makes a startup more fundable? Pitches and so on?
Yeah. I'll actually take a step back here. I'm guessing there are quite a few startups looking for pre-Series A 1 to 25 crores kind of funding. So I'll just first touch upon the key aspects which we look at pitches in general, and then we can get into the biotech part. There are a few things which every startup, I hope covers in their tech. There are things like team, TAM, the product, talk about service, traction, competition. Timing is one part which most of the startups forget to cover. So if you can spend some time on that portion too. And when it comes to biotech in particular, or deep tech in general, I think IP becomes very, very critical. So, if we can spend some more time, the founders can spend some time explaining what the IP is, how is it differentiating them. And let me pick up an example here. Say there is a biotech startup which wants to extract protein or fat from living microorganisms, for example, maybe insects, for example. So if such a startup has to pitch, it would help if you can talk about what is the product, the end product that the startup has come up with, but also talk about what are the current alternatives and how your product is actually superior to them. It might be product quality, pricing, etc., might be more sustainable. So those USPs have to very clearly come out in the pitch, and it makes the product that much more sellable. So that's one. Second, specifically for startups looking to raise $3-4 million or so, things like traction become important. So if you can show some traction, show some continuous growth in that traction coming up. Who are the eventual buyers? What the distribution will look like? Just touch upon them. You don't need to kind of make a 20-page page. In a 7 to 10-page page. If you can just touch upon these aspects, it kind of entices an investor to engage with you further. And then, of course, in detailed discussions, we can spend more time understanding what the startup is trying to do.
Thank you. Pinak, I would love to hear what you think, what excites you after the first meeting with an entrepreneur.
So, one of the challenges that many of the investors face while listening to pitches by biotech startups, and I think Saurabh had alluded to that. The fact of the matter is that there are not many technical experts in venture capital funds. So the pitch needs to be as clear, as simple, and as technically non-challenging as possible. The whole idea is to show what is your value proposition and what is the differentiating factor for your value proposition, not getting into a lot of technical jargon. What happens because of that, and Arpit and you and I know what happens because of too much of complexity of technical jargon, is that you put off the investor at the end of the first meeting itself. Not that he is he does not like your product, but he thinks that it's too complex for me to get into it. So I think that's a very important aspect that startups need to kind of.
On this piece, let me just step in. I have realized that if the founder is not able to communicate to an investor in the first meeting, the founder is likely not be able to convince customers here, communicate the same to a customer also. Because the clarity is not in the mind. So that I agree. That's a point. Please continue. Sorry, I'm commenting.
So the second point, of course, is once you have a pitch deck, you need to be able to kind of not really read the lines. That is something which the investor would obviously do, but be able to use that 1 hour that is given to you to come up with the right story for your product or a service that you're offering, and be able to show the investor that this is something which has a unique market, and your ability to capture that market has to be clearly articulated by the founders. Otherwise, it seems all over the place, and you really don't make head or tail out of that conversation that you've had. At the end of 60 minutes, the investor walks off thinking that it was a waste of his 1 hour, but and the founders and promoters think that it was a waste of their hour. But the fact of the matter is that the investor is looking at you with a very specific lens. It is not necessarily the same lens that all other peers in your technical field would be looking at you with. It is a different lens, and that lens is about techno-commercial lens. It has to have the commercial angle to it, and without which it will fall apart. In that conversation just tends to fall apart. Third is the very fact that you are going to the investor to raise a certain amount of capital. You have to be able to articulate the end use of capital. Because some XYZ company has raised 5 million, that is why you want 5 million, does not cut ice with the investor. You have to be able to demonstrate a tangible use for that 5 million that you raise, and how will you use it, what are the timelines for its usage. All of that needs to be kind of clearly articulated. Otherwise, it is like, I want 5 million because somebody else raised 5 million and they raised it at this valuation, so I want this valuation. So it becomes a discussion in futility after a certain point in time. And last but not the least, uh, again, this is an important consideration. We are unfortunately not in the United States, where things are more evolved, the market is more evolved, the product margins are far more than what you have in the Indian context. Indian consumer, and even of health, is a very price sensitive consumer. Your margins will be far lesser in the Indian context as compared to both ASP and margins are lower as compared to the US market. So suddenly thinking that you will be able to kind of get the same benchmark valuation that a company which is with of a similar profile is getting in the US, and you extrapolating that to the Indian context may not work.
Thank you. 2 points before I move on. I'd love to maybe talk about it as well. One is, yes, you are right. I will give you an example. One of our companies is a company called Beto, for those who are listening. At the point of time when Beto had about 1 lakh actively paying customer, Livongo had gone to public in US. Livongo was valued in the range of $20 billion, and Beto was struggling to raise at about 50 million at that point. So it's a massive difference in the ecosystem. Thank you, Vinay, for bringing this up. Also, on the commercial aspects, you know, I would love to take an opinion across the table. Whose fault is it that the investors don't understand technical aspects of biotech? Is it investors' fault? Is it startups' fault? Or is it, nobody's fault, means everyone's fault? What is your opinion? Mansi? Yes, no?
So I think I may have a slightly biased view here because we
Please.
are a healthcare fund, and
Of course.
at least I'm partially a doctor on the team. So we are trying to address it step
Yeah.
by step. But certainly it's the ecosystem fault, and I think the investment community's fault. I mean, it's certainly not the entrepreneur's fault why there are no technical expertise on the table. But I think beyond technical expertise, because if the founder, I think some of the points that Pinak mentioned, if they get addressed in the first meeting when the founder is meeting a non-technical investor as well, I think if there is enough excitement in the system, technical expertise can be brought on board to evaluate a deal. So I don't think that is the reason why deals don't get done. I think it's the first meeting itself where things don't get communicated in the right manner is where things fall off.
Saurabh, your opinion?
See, my take is that at the end of the day, fundraising is a sales process. So the founder has to understand to whom he or she is trying to sell his or her idea or vision, and he or she has to do what it takes. So if a founder is meeting a investor with a technical background, then absolutely use all the jargons available in the world to have that discussion. It will make the discussion more engaging and fast. But if the founders are meeting sort of a generalist investor, it makes sense to use more of layman language so that the investor kind of at the end of the meeting is excited enough to continue. Partly I do feel there is some fault of the investor community too. It would again, I come from an electronics engineering background, and therefore one of the companies we invested, for example, is Atomberg, which made brushless DC motors. Back in the day when we first had a discussion with them, just because I could understand what they were trying to tell me, it made that much easier for me to quickly take a decision and invest. So technical expertise definitely matters. I think over time the investor ecosystem is also evolving. Perhaps in 5 years from now, we'll have biotech, or at least, there are a few deep tech ones. We may have a few biotech focused funds also. And I think it's also, I would say it's also up to the investors to kind of understand what a founder is doing and perhaps help him or her to translate that into a big business proposition. So at least part of it, the investors can also play a role. Yes, the entrepreneur has to be the main driver, but investors can also guide the entrepreneurs to some extent as to this great product which you have built, how it can be monetized or sold in a better way. So yeah, that's my take.
Thank you. Pinag, your opinion?
I think though I would obviously take some part of the blame as an investor of not understanding uh, some of the very nuanced biotech startups. I think that in any case, even with the best expertise on board, a very nuanced, uh, biotech startup will require an external help for the fund to come on to take on board to try and evaluate that opportunity. Having said that, one of the things that at the end of the day, if you were to look at it in a very pragmatic manner, the startup that is trying to raise funds is the seller, and the the person who's trying to he is trying to sell it to, which is the investor, is the customer for that product. And at all points in time, the startup has to go with the belief that the customer is always right. That is the basic philosophy of any kind of trade. So if you are able to convince the customer on the first call, then the customer will get whatever it takes to make it happen. But if that first call becomes a, a completely irrational call, then it does not make sense.
Super. This is great. Thank you. Moving on, what I would like to hear, there are two people who are medical doctors, and there's one person who's a venture debt provider. So, to the doctors first. Both of you have worked in clinic. What is it that startup, what is the purpose that startups serve in the broader healthcare ecosystem? Let's start with India, because both of you have worked in India. And if they definitely help, then what is it that they can do better in general? Because most biotech companies will sell to providers in India. So what is it that they can do better to be even more useful or be accessible? Mansi, you want to go first?
Sure, sure. So, Arpit, if I understand your question correctly, you're saying what is it that, as a clinician, what I
Yeah.
would. Okay.
What are you looking forward to in startups?
So I think, as a clinician, and I think anyone who's worked in a hospital, and I guess Pinak will talk about his experiences. I think what any doctor, any clinician is looking at is the product enhancing the quality of care. Fundamentally, that's what anyone is looking at. Beyond that, is it making the procedure better, faster, cheaper? I think some of those can be commercial decisions. So I think what, as a startup, can do for the ecosystem could be different for different stakeholders, because even a hospital, even a clinic has multiple stakeholders. A doctor is just one stakeholder. There is a procurement person whose priorities may be cost reduction, and hence his and the clinician's view may not align on maybe a new product. The hospital administrator will have a different uh, need for a startup. So I think the views may be slightly different here, but fundamentally, I think what anyone is looking at is this making my job easier, faster, and is it impacting my patient's life in a meaningful manner? It could be a product, it could be a service, it could be a after home service that continues from the hospital, which companies like Kote, etc. are doing. So I think that I mean, I don't know if I've answered your question cohesively, but I think there are many aspects to what startups can work with clinicians and the providers on to solve for different issues that they may be facing.
Thank you. Pinak, your view, about
Yeah.
long years in the clinic. So where do
Yeah.
startups play a role, and what can they do better?
So I think one of the important aspects, and I think it's important to get that kind of you know kind of an opinion or a guidance from a clinician for startups, is because many startups end up solving a problem which is in their mind and not necessarily on the ground. And that is something which is an important aspect, because when you actually put that solution on the ground, there are not many takers for it, because it may in the founder's mind trying to solve a very important issue, but then when you actually put it on ground, there are multiple challenges to it, including the fact about adoption, acceptability of the product, or the fact that it is actually disrupting more than actually enhancing the seamlessness of operations. So all of that needs to be thought through while one is developing a solution. The second aspect, of course, is very important consideration, that I have made a brilliant product, brilliant, and the doctor loves it, but who's going to pay for it? Is the current system going to be able to support its payment? If not, can I think of alternative strategies to monetize it? Can I do it? Can I do it in any other way? Is something which you need to start thinking of right at the outset, because you can't then have a great product that you built out and then start thinking about monetizing it. So those are two very, very important aspects. So we've worked with very brilliant startups who have created products for use in both at software, on the software side, on the hardware side. We've worked with startups who have also created products on biopharma products. Brilliant companies, but some of them had not thought through as to who is going to pay for it, and their ability to communicate to the larger ecosystem, which Mansi alluded to, which is basically not only doctors but the administrator, the procurement guy, their ability to communicate to all the stakeholders the actual value proposition, or the enhancement of revenues, or the improvement in cost structures that the product or the service is going to uh, bring to the entire ecosystem, is not articulated well.
This is amazing. Thank you. Startups who are listening to it, this was great advice. Please pay heed to it. And those who are on listening to us on YouTube, please rewind and read enough. This is great. Thank you. One last question now come to Saurabh. Saurabh, Trifecta is largely known as a debt provider. I know you have a growth venture fund as well, which you are representing. Tell us, where does debt help and where does growth equity play a role in biotech startups journey?
Sure. So debt in general can serve two very critical needs. Typically, biotech startups would have some capex, and these startups might often sell to business entities. These might have a B2B play, and therefore working capital also comes into play. So for both working capital as well as capex, debt is a kind of a great solution. And whenever it is available, I would advise startups to take it. When it comes to growth equity, primarily it would come into play once the startups are at a Series C or a beyond stage. By the time a startup reaches that stage, the product market fit would have been in place, the unit economics would be in place, the startup would be CM positive, and it would be primarily for scaling, maybe to new geographies, for example. So growth equity is primarily meant for kind of expanding already established and well-proven business models. So that's the key use case, expansion, kind of offering to more what you have already developed.
Okay, and where does debt come into picture?
So debt will continue because working capital capex will continue to be a part, right? So of course you can always raise it. And as far as Trifecta is concerned, Trifecta's venture debt, is actually general purpose. So it's not that one has to specifically use it only for working capital or capex. Startup can use it for marketing or other kind of burns as well. Someone wants to spend on growth, you're welcome to do it as long as there is a good plan, venture debt is available. In fact,
thank you. One last question to all my panelists. When you are looking at startups in biotech, I don't know whether all of you have funded companies, all of you are investors, companies which are biotech companies. I know healthcare is more common than biotech. If you have, then please talk about your experience doing this. If you have not, then why have you not? And what would perhaps in next 1-2 years you will you want to see so that you will jump on them? Or I mean, I'm sure there are cases where you came close to it. Tell us what, if available, in those companies would have taken you over the edge. Pinak, you want to start, please?
So honestly, we've evaluated a lot of biotech companies. Again, as a fund philosophy, uh, the, there has to be a fundamental change in the fund philosophy about creating these bouquet of 8-10 biotech investments for us to really be able to kind of um, make a successful case for biotech investments. One, we've not been able to align internally on all stakeholders to try and be able to do that. That's one. But second point, of course, is the fact that we did Stand Life Sciences from our first fund. I think that was a great company. They had been able to demonstrate their ability to not only do business in India but also in the US, and a significant amount of their business was coming in from the US. I think that gave us the confidence that okay, there are companies with this kind of potential who are able to cross leverage the opportunities globally, and in that context I think we've done some things in AI, as you're aware. We did Cure.ai and Visa, which again are in the AI space, which are kind of leveraging AI to solve for radiology and mental health challenges. So that has been our philosophy. We've still really not done cutting edge biotech in the kind of R&D stage companies.
Super. Thank you. Mansi, you want to talk about your experience? You have been a biotech entrepreneur yourself. So what would you like to see more in case you have not made investments so far?
Yeah. So I think, I've been a biotech entrepreneur many years ago, and since then the ecosystem has evolved. So it's good to see that there's been a change in what investors are looking at now. But in my previous fund, I had made 2 investments in drug discovery companies. One in the dermatology space called Vyom Biosciences, the second an oncology company called Invictus. So I've had some experience in biotech investing in India. I think the challenge, even when we had invested in those companies and we did write big checks of about $4 to $5 million, was the follow-on capital for these companies to do their clinical trials globally. Again, I think, as I had mentioned earlier, the product that they were developing was in India, but for the global markets. Hence, the clinical trials had to be done globally, and global clinical trials can be very expensive. And hence, capital from India, which could have been a couple of million, didn't suffice for the kind of aspirations they had. So they did go outside of India to raise capital. So I think the challenge that we had faced then, and I think it continues even today, is the follow-on capital for these companies. I think all of us as early stage investors can invest only a couple of $1 million, if at all. Like Pinak said, maybe if our fund mandate allows for it. But I think it's the follow-on capital that really is lacking in India. And I guess that's the ecosystem. Probably collectively we can all bridge between India and the world, and I think that may allow for more innovation than putting the entire onus on Indian investors.
Thank you. Saurabh, what has been your experience?
So when it comes to funding, or rather making biotech startups more fundable from our perspective, There are a few changes I would like to see. One, there has to be very clear unit economics articulation. Second, on the traction part, and I'm talking more about revenues, not really profits here. Startups can continue to be loss making for several years. That's not a big problem. But at least on the traction part, there has to be, I'm talking about Series A kind of startups, companies which want to raise a Series A, at least a couple of crores, 2-3 crores monthly kind of a revenue. And there has to be a sustained growth, which is demonstrable. If revenue is lesser than these numbers, then there has to be a very clear path to achieve these numbers or surpass these within the next maybe 6 months or so. I think if these 2-3 points can be covered, I think there would be more. At least I would be able to fund more.
Super, thank you. I think I have a couple of more questions. I can go on and on, but we should give this opportunity for everyone in the audience to also ask some. Poonam and Manish, in case, will you moderate this? Will you get us questions? I don't know whether you already have questions from the audience. I have just put in a chat window. If people want to ask questions, they can either raise hands or put in a chat window.
Yeah, sure, Arpit. We don't have as of now questions, but audience will ask here.
Okay, thank you. So audience, please feel free. This is your time. The three investors, also myself, we are decision makers in our firms. So we will be able to ask you, give you the straight answers. It will be hard for you to see four of us in the same room again. And we have an active interest in healthcare companies. So some of us have engaged with biotech companies also.
Hello, this is Jayant Kamath. Can you
Yes,
hear me?
your voice is very feeble, Jayant.
I'm from Bangalore. I run a company medical device company called iCaltech Innovations.
Okay.
Okay, so we are Biotech funded. Okay, now the product is ready. We have launched the product. It's a respiratory device.
Sorry, unable to clearly hear you. You said product something?
It's a respiratory diagnostic device.
Respiratory diagnostic. Okay.
Okay, we are trying to address a problem which is there in the currently in this domain. So we've launched this product. We've done the trials, all that. We launched this product recently in the National Pulmonology Conference. Okay, and it is accepted. We have paid customers, about 50 installations across India. Okay, now we want to scale up. Okay, we want to scale up. On our own, in terms of distribution, it takes its own time. But we have almost finalized with a pharma guy. Okay, pharma OEM for distribution. There's one channel. Apart from that, we are looking at exports and so on. So for the scale up, so what's your suggestion? What's that we should do? 1, 2, 3, and if would you be interested in investing in our company?
Sure, I'll keep it open. I don't know who will be interested in taking this question. Pinaki, want to try attempting this respiratory device?
Yeah. So Javan, I think couple of things here. I think the go-to market needs to be clearly articulated by you. How are you going to? What is your strategy first? Are you going to target? How are you going to target your addressable customers? And then how do you create the distribution channels to reach these customers? That needs to be really thought through and articulated, because that is going to be clear. That is going to be very critical. Similarly, on the export, side, how are you going to reach those markets? Who are going to be your channel partners for that? So those are areas which you will have to clearly outline. And lastly, the important thing again, as I mentioned to you, it's a single product company has a challenge in their ability to get the same value out of a one customer from a single product. So the effort of reaching out to that customer is going to be the same, but if you don't have a bouquet of offerings, then how do you optimize your cost of marketing? That is going to be a very important consideration. And in that context, I think you should be ready to kind of do two things. That one, either you look at companies in the respiratory space that are already there, and kind of you join hands with them to take a, a bouquet of products to the market. Or the other alternative is that you use, I don't know it, I guess you said respiratory diagnostics, but then you use the channel of a large pharma to become a companion diagnostic for some of their products, so that you reach a larger scale. Once you reach that scale, then of course you can build on the product side as well as your own branding.
Thanks, Dr. Pinna. Appreciate your suggestion.
Yeah,
Thank
also
you.
just wanted to
Mansi,
add
you
to
want to
what,
add, please?
yeah, so just wanted to add to what Pinak has said. I think you mentioned about exports. So I think exports also depends on what market you're exporting to, right? Because a US export would require a US FDA, could also fetch you a different kind of value and evaluation. Because of them being highly regulated, CE can provide you a very different value, and I think exports to African countries, etc., is of different values. So I think picking your markets right, picking what's accessible, is one. And I think the other thing I always like to see in medtech companies is obviously the gross margin profile and how that changes as you add distribution layers to it, because your margins will keep depleting as you have more layers added to your sales process. So I think maintaining a high gross margin structure, thinking about bill of material, etc., early on, and how that will change or evolve as you scale, because that will determine your cost of marketing and cost of sales, which is a very big determinant to the success of the product. I think would be just some of the suggestions I would like to make.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mansi. We have already applied for US FDA 510K. We're in the final process. We should get it next 3 to 6 months max.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Super. Let's move on. Others who have questions, please switch on your video and ask one. Ravindranath.
Hi. Yeah, hi.
Hi.
And thank you very much for the entire session. It was very lively and a lot of learnings for us. Thank you for all the investors joining us, and it's really a wonderful session for us. And mine is a startup company. We started 4 years back, and we started with instrumentation. With the support of Biotech, we were able to move to informatics. We have developed application for quality management system, which can be used in pharma and biotechnology industry. Of course, last 2-3 years we have been working on the product. The product is ready now. Like, we are working on 3 applications. One is a laboratory information management system, which is for entire sample management for the pharma and biotechnology industry. Currently, most of the organizations are working on paper-based documentation. This application will help them in moving from paper to paperless, probably I would say less paper documentation, wherein 30 to 40% of the documentation can be done electronically. So we have 3 products, like a laboratory information management system, which is called LIMS, and electronic lab notebook, which is ELN. And the entire experiments can be done through electronic format by using any iPads or tabs or even the computers. And we also have a backup software which can be used for taking the entire backup of the data whichever generated in these companies and the biotechnology and pharma industry in a single environment. Of course, most of the discussions were on biotechnology and more towards the medical and diagnosis. I'm not sure, like, would any of the investors would be interested in discussing with us on the informatics part. Just I was thinking of checking out what is that interest you have and any possibility of getting funded. I'm sorry, there is a light failure. I'll just switch off my video. I will still continue the conversation.
Saurabh, you want to take this?
So this seems more like a sort of software application in the healthcare space. In general, such applications, will in general find more acceptance amongst investors. So, I'd suggest perhaps, Ravindra,
Yeah, Rabindranath, yes.
Yeah, I think you should reach out to multiple investors. You can reach out to all the panelists here, at least to me. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to invest right, but I can definitely make the right connects. Yeah, I mean, perhaps we can do a one-to-one conversation, and I can provide more inputs on that.
Yeah, that would be really great, and thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Mansi and Pinag, any opinion about this business?
So it's a Ravindranath. I think it's a very interesting business. I think one we should certainly have a conversation, and depending upon the scale, we can then have a touch point with you, and then come look at it at the appropriate time when we where it fits into our investment thesis. But certainly interesting enough to have a conversation.
Sure, sir. And just to show you, like, probably I'll take another minute or so, sir, not more than that. Sorry for that. Like in India, about we have did some kind of assessment as well. There are about 3,000 pharma industry with manufacturing of 12,000 plus, and we also have about 2,000 plus biotechnology and consumer industry. So there are about 25,000 plus companies are available. But currently, the industry's usage of this application is only 5%, probably less than 5%. So the market is wide open, but very limited people are there. The reason being is affordability is the question. With the support of Bairag, we were able to bring the product which is very much affordable. And then now we are getting into market. There is a good response coming up. I'm sure we will be able to manage and get some good business soon. We are open for any kind of conversation with you also.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
I
Nice
see
talking to
that
you, sir.
Ravi has switched on video. Ravi, you have a question? Please tell us about
Yes,
your company name
yes,
and please tell us, ask us the question.
definitely. First of all, thank you very much for this interesting conversation. My name is Ravi Kaushik and I'm founder at Earth. So what we are doing, we are protecting people from air pollution and disease transmission, both using antimicrobial air filters that uses plant-based biopolymers over filters. So what we are doing, we are changing germ-growing filters, which usually become a breeding ground for germs, with our germ-destroying filters. And the tech has been developed in collaboration with IIT Bombay, IIT Kanpur, and IC Bangalore. We've been on news. We do have customers like RBI, ONGC, Stock Holding Corporation of India. We are in touch with car manufacturers so that they can replace the germ destroying filters, F&B industry, healthcare industry. We have raised seed round from a micro VC fund, and so basically my question is like this fund we have utilized for capacity building, doing a lot of pilots, real life validation apart from lab validation. Yes, we have SARS-CoV-2 testing as well from CSIR lab and Irshad lab. So Delta variant, Wuhan variant, black fungus, we have tested on all of that, and we have done a lot of real life validations. Now we have used this fund, the seed fund, for mostly trying to find product market fit. Now we are trying to go for the next round pre-series A. So are investors excited about the leads that we have? And definitely we are in long-term conversation with some clients. They take a long time when we are talking about B2C, B2B business. So that's what I just wanted to understand, like hot leads which we have an interest from various organization. Is that something, or we have to realize the revenue only, and that's when investors are interested?
Pinag?
I think, Ravi, congratulations on what you're trying to build. I think it's unique, certainly. All what we would like to look at is certainly not conversations. They need to at least convert into some kind of commitments, and that is going to be extremely critical. You may realize the revenue over a period of time, that's fine, but then we look at what is you know, the actual contract value for for all the conversations that you've had, and then it becomes an interesting proposition. Uh, Conversations, I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of conversations, and it's very difficult to fructify these conversations. Uh, and at the end of the day, that is the proof of the pudding.
Absolutely right.
Others you want to add, Mansi, Saurabh?
Yeah, so I think the profile of investors that also you can look at might be slightly different, because I think maybe seed stage investors, pre-seed, like you said, you've already raised some. I think those investors be might be able to come in at stages where early conversations and maybe one or two customers have converted into a paying customer base. I think they may be comfortable at coming in at that stage. So I think it's also what risk profile an investor comes in at. The investors on this panel are slightly later stages, at least where there's been traction, there's been paying customers, whether in the B2B segment or in the B2B segment, there needs to be some proof of paying customer base, at least for all of us to be looking at companies.
Thank you. Saurabh, any opinion?
I'll second that thought. Ravi, all I would say is, do reach out. Let's have a conversation. There are kind of enough and more friends around in the community. While we might not be able to invest, I can of course connect.
Sounds good.
Thank
Anyone else has a question? Please feel free to switch on video and ask it. I see that we are running out of time. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, I'm just giving you under 10 seconds to give us a signal. Okay. Thank you. Poonam, Manish, back
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, thank you, panelists, for a wonderful discussion. I hope this session is helpful for the startups ecosystem. Now, I would request Mr. Amit Pandey, Vice President IVCA, for a closing remark. Over to you, Amit.
I thank you, Poonam. I think there's nothing much more to add. It's been a really wonderful session. First of all, thank you to all the three doctors present here and the investors present here, Arpit and Saurabh. So the three doctors, obviously, identified Dr. Manish from Biotech. Thank you, sir, for putting this up. It's a wonderful, and Biotech is definitely the backbone for the biotech ecosystem in the country, starting from supporting the early stage startups to now also supporting the funds. It's really valuable contribution to this sort of sector, which is which has been a little overlooked by the investment ecosystem. There were some spicy questions that Arpit definitely brought up to discuss those elements. But we have experts now. We have the doctors and we've got folks like Arpit and Saurabh who've been in the ecosystem for far too long. And I believe that it brings to the point where startups maybe sort of need to figure out the right way to reach out to these set of investors. Maybe what's the best way to reach out? What should they be covering in their sort of decks or emails or whatever? I think that kind of things are much more required, because this sector being so sort of I mean, the founders need to be very sector focused, and this is a very specialist a specialization which is required for the founders to be in this ecosystem, which probably we see in a lot of coders also, who are the techie guys but not very well in pitching, etc. So maybe those are the kind of soft skills which the founders need to develop maybe in the early stage, and also figure out how the VC ecosystem works. So without much ado, thank you everyone for this session. Thank you, Biotech. Thank you, Startup India. Thank you all the investors. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
Super. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Great, generous
Thanks.
discussion. Enjoyed. I think it was very helpful. Thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Manish, bye. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.